Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. And thank you for joining us today, both here at 52 Martin Place and online. My name is Monica Rose. I'm a Senior Associate in the Policy and Strategy team at Women New South Wales. And I want to start by acknowledging that we come together today on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and acknowledge the lands that people are dialing in from today, as well as acknowledging elders past and present and our Aboriginal colleagues that are attending this event with us. Thank you for your generous knowledge sharing. As the New South Wales Government Gender Equality Network Secretariat, say that fast, Women New South Wales is honoured to host the first ever GGEN event. We thank you to the members of Women New South Wales and the TCO team who have worked hard to put this event on today. And I just need to do a bit of quick housekeeping before we kick off. So we have an exciting hour ahead of us, which will include a lineup of speakers delivering an opening address, a keynote, a panel discussion and a Q&A. So there will be opportunity for questions as part of that Q&A. For anyone who's tuned in online, if we could just ask you to please turn your cameras off to help us have a smooth connection throughout the event. And if you have any questions online for our speakers, if you put them in the chat, our team here will collate those questions and put them forward as part of the panel. Our chair is also taking questions from our in-person audience. So again, feel free to pop your hand up at that stage if you've got any questions. The event will be recorded and we'll share how the recording can be accessed in our post-event communications. And lastly, the team will be sharing in the chat the form to join GGEN. So join up, sign up. We really encourage you. We want as many members as we can have, share it widely and encourage your colleagues to join with us as well. The more of us that are working on this together, the better outcomes we can achieve. So now let me introduce and welcome the chair of our event, Kathrina Lo. I've been very lucky to work under Kathrina and can confirm very confidently that she's a wonderful example of inclusion and applying an intersectional gender equitable lens to everything that she does in her work, and also our wonderful executive sponsor at GGEN. So thank you and welcome, Kathrina.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you today. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're meeting on Gadigal land and pay my respects to the elders of this land and also extend that respect to any Aboriginal colleagues with us today. So I am so delighted to welcome you to this GGEN event. It's the first whole of sector event since we launched this network in March of this year. So GGEN was established as a platform for our public sector to build our capability in embedding inclusive and respectful workplace practices. GGEN also supports the government's commitment to advance gender equality through things like legislation, policies, programs and services. The Secretary's Board, of which I'm a member, has issued a leadership statement that commits us to applying a gender lens in policy making. And the commitment is underpinned by something called Gender Equality Action Plans, which I'll say a bit more about in a moment. So I'm really thrilled to be the executive sponsor for GGEN. Not only does it align with my statutory functions to promote equity and diversity in the sector and to help shape a public sector workforce that reflects that of the broader community, it also aligns with my very personal goal of being a champion for diversity and inclusion in the sector. So one thing I do want to call out is that as we strive for gender equality, we need to make sure we don't leave anyone or any groups behind. And so this includes women with disability, First Nations women, women from CALD backgrounds, women from the LGBTIQ+ community, and younger and older women. Now, most of us in this room would know that ongoing barriers to women's workforce participation mean that women earn less, accumulate less in retirement and are more at risk of long-term financial insecurity. What we do know is that greater gender diversity in workplaces increases productivity and prosperity for the whole community. Addressing gender segregation across industries, occupations and importantly in leadership roles is key to rectifying systemic imbalances and disparities between genders. Pleasingly, there are a number of New South Wales government investments geared towards ensuring women have better access to resources, opportunities and rights at work. So these include the rollout of gender equality action plans by July next year by all agencies. So the aim of this is to uplift the capacity of agencies to ensure a gender lens is applied to policies and programs, and to support workplace gender equality through the development of processes and transparent workforce data. In the current financial year, $2.9 million has been committed to supporting the Future Women's Academy to assist women to become job ready. $2 million has been committed to establishing the New South Wales Women's Working Centre to help women navigate workplace issues, including sexual harassment, wages and parental leave. And $2 million has also been committed to the Return to Work Pathways program to reduce barriers for women re-entering the workforce. In addition to that, New South Wales Treasury has recently piloted the Gender Impact Assessment Policy, which came into effect on 1 October. Now, what this means is that all government agencies are required to prepare a gender impact assessment where they're bringing forward a new policy proposal for Cabinet consideration that is valued at over $10 million. And within my own office, we've continued our focus on cultivating and promoting respectful, safe and inclusive public sector workplaces for everyone. So last year, I issued a statutory direction to all government sector agencies to implement a sexual harassment prevention and response policy that meets certain minimum standards. At the same time, I provided a model policy for agencies to use that is trauma-informed and person-centred. As a sector, we learned many lessons in developing these policies, one of which is the need to shift not only our policies, but also our focus and mindset from response to prevention. The fact is we all play a crucial part in eliminating unlawful behaviour in the workplace. It's also equally important that we operationalise these policies and embed them into our workplace culture. Now, to this end, my office has developed training for people managers to better understand their role and obligations in preventing and responding to sexual harassment, in cultivating a culture of respect in the workplace, and information about the supports that are available. And it's been really heartening to see agencies take up this training and roll it out to their people managers. So our program today, we will hear from the wonderful Professors Ray Cooper and Elizabeth Hill from the University of Sydney's Centre for Gender Equality and Inclusion at Work. And I'm really privileged to be on the advisory board and provide a public sector perspective for the centre. Ray and Liz will be talking about what women in New South Wales want from work and how this resonates and interacts with the government's strategies and plans. Now, Ray and Liz have done some excellent research on what matters most to women in New South Wales when it comes to their aspirations for work. They recently launched a paper at the Policy Talks Forum on policy for a gender equitable future. So Ray and Liz will then be joined up the front here by Sonia Dametto. Many of you know Sonia, who is the Executive Director for People, Culture and Talent at the Premier's Department. And I'll facilitate a panel discussion. And we definitely encourage audience participation in that discussion. So please feel free to ask questions and share your insights. And for those online, please put your questions into the comments section. For those people attending in person, you can raise your hand, and at the end of the formalities today, there will be some afternoon tea, and we really hope that you can stay and join us. But right now, I would like to welcome Ray and Liz to the lectern to give their keynote address. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for the invitation, and thanks for that introduction, Kathrina. Kathrina's a fabulous member of our advisory board, has been with us since the beginning in acknowledgement of the importance of the public sector to any kind of strategy, national strategy for building, driving gender equitable futures of work. And the reason Did it go down? No. Thank you. I also want to begin by acknowledging the lands on which we meet, and also these are the same lands that we work on at the University of Sydney, and certainly honour and respect and acknowledge the knowledge and learning that a local Gadigal people of the Eora Nation have passed on for many thousands of years, and that we then build on in terms of the knowledge that we hope to build in our student body. And I'd like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are here with us today. So the reason that Kathrina invited us here to your meeting today is because, as I said, we've got a strong kind of perspective and engagement with government, both Commonwealth and state. And it is our view that what happens in New South Wales really matters to what's going on at the national level. So, as many of you will know, the New South Wales government is one of the largest employers in the Southern Hemisphere. It's the largest employer of women. That's partly as a reflection of the responsibilities of state governments and the size of the population in New South Wales. But nevertheless, it's a good thing to say. 30% of the country's working women are employed by the New South Wales government. So that means that how well we're doing here in our state really matters for the rest of Australia, and it's an opportunity for New South Wales to really model best practice and make some real inroads into the way we design, manage, regulate and engage in work. It's a highly feminised sector. About 2/3 of employees in New South Wales public sector are female, and we know that, and Kathrina has commented on the kinds of things that the New South Wales government is engaged in and has been engaged in for several years now. And I guess one of the reasons that we wanted to really kind of dig down into the opportunities for state governments to think about opportunities for driving gender equality across work and across society is because we are at this particular moment, both at the Commonwealth level and the state levels, where we have politicians and bureaucrats who are absolutely engaged for the moment around issues of gender equality. And so it's a really important moment from our view as researchers to really kind of drive hard into that space that has opened up after the last couple of years and see how far we can get while there's increased and elevated political will and build capacity so that we can continue to drive that change. So we're here as academics, not as, well, we are public servants as well, but we're primarily, I guess we think of ourselves as academics first, but with a responsibility, Ray and I feel, to push our research into the public domain and to inform public policy as part of our kind of public responsibility. So we are trained to do great research, and as part of that, we're running the Centre for Gender Equality and Inclusion at Work. And we have a whole lot of great data that can, we think, help to inform and drive different kinds of policy responses and processes of implementation for change. And our data assets are really centred on women's voice, women's workplace experience, their attitudes and their aspirations for the future of work. So we understand a lot about workplaces, career progression, issues there. We understand about the economy more broadly and labour markets. But one thing that our centre really brings to the table in terms of evidence-based research is worker voice, and in particular women's worker voices. And so how do we do that? We've got a number of data assets that we draw upon to shape policy suggestions and shape change. National surveys, we've got 2 national representative surveys of young Australian workers. We're very focused on the future of work. So the idea is if you understand those that are kind of under 40, they are the future of work, but that's not exclusive, but that's certainly kind of one of our focuses. We've done 2 national surveys in Australia, 2017 and 2022. We've added to that 2 international surveys so we can do some comparative work between Australia, the UK and Japan. High-income countries with quite different kind of work care regimes that shape women and men's workforce participation and economic security. We've got a couple of industry surveys around law and retail, very different sectors. But that survey data really helps to give us an overall picture of what workers' experiences are like, what they want from work and how they're faring in their workplaces. We tend to use that to then identify hotspots and then do a deep dive with focus groups. And those focus groups are held across sectors of the economy, across occupations, across location. We're very interested in, what's going on in southwestern Sydney or the Central Coast compared to the kind of state aggregate. Life stages is really important, as is the demographic profiles, visa status, et cetera. We also use one-on-one interviews to have a really deep dive into the experience of key informants, people with a bit of a higher level understanding of some of the key issues and hotspots that are occurring, and we use those to also shape up our focus groups. So we've got a whole heap of fabulous data that helps us think through the experience and what needs to change and how might it change, because we know that despite decades of effort, there are still really stubborn gaps that remain both in Australia. Australia reflects the global picture as well, but those gender gaps in participation, in pay, in career progression, all those kinds of things are holding the national economy back. And they're undermining a capacity for the Australian population to build an inclusive community, an inclusive labour market, and an inclusive society. So there's no end to kind of wow facts that demonstrate this. These are just a few. You might be surprised to know that our segmented labour markets across the genders haven't really changed much since the 1980s. That remains a really big structural impediment to generating equality. Pay gaps, we hear a lot of about that. There's lots of ways, as some of you will know, as to how you measure those, but in some industries, they can be as high as 50%, thinking investment and finance. We also have really great work that came out of New South Wales Treasury a couple of years ago that identifies the 55% pay penalty as a result of becoming a mother, and the way in which that pay penalty is sustained for up to 5 years post return to work. So, the motherhood penalty, as the literature calls it, certainly has not gone away. And one thing that we're really mindful of as we move towards gender neutral parental leave is we don't want that motherhood penalty to translate into a parenthood penalty, because we know if it does, men will not take it. So we need to really elevate and resist and recalibrate our policies and our management strategies within workplaces so that we don't get that penalty. And sexual harassment, pervasive. 2 in 5 women have experienced sexual harassment in their workplace in the last 5 years. So a really big problem. So at the Centre for Gender Equality and Inclusion at Work, we understand those kinds of wow facts, those worrying facts, the way they're generated by this complex interaction of about 8 drivers. So we know that education and skills, pre-mark entry into the labour market. We know that girls, while women, young women, particularly in Australia under 30 years of age, are much more likely to hold a bachelor's degree than men. We know that those bachelor's degrees are actually in different subject areas, and that whole kind of segregation between women and young girls being funneled into kind of things like geography and maybe biology if they do science, but certainly not the high level maths or economics or physics. That starts very early, and so we've got men, young girls and young boys tracking through the education system in different parts, in different disciplines. And then that obviously affects the kinds of university degrees they take and then the kinds of jobs that they are able to undertake. We know another driver is the division of unpaid labour, where women do a much larger share of the unpaid labour, unpaid care labour than men on average. These are all averages. And that leads to working hours disparity, right? It's very hard, although an increasing number of households do have 2 full-time workers. If you're in one of those, you know how hard it is. But if you've got someone in a very long hours job, typically a man, it's very hard. It really curtails the opportunities, limits the options for the other partner in that household, typically a woman. We've got horizontal labour market segmentation, so women and men being concentrated in different sectors and occupations, but we've also got that vertical stratification, you know, the pyramid where the lower down the labour market ladder, you've got more a concentration of women, and in the top jobs, you've got more men. We also know that women dominate insecure forms of employment, and that has an impact on the kinds of conditions that they're able to access. And overall, because in the context of segregated labour markets, we've got deep undervaluation of those hyper-feminised sectors of the economy, things like teaching, things like nursing, things like early childhood education and care. And we've got an overvaluation, arguably, of male-dominated sectors like finance, investment banking, etc. So this all culminates and is further kind of accentuated by the dynamics around gendered workplace experiences and the disrespect and lack of inclusion that many women face in their workplaces. So that's the kind of diagnosis of the problem. And I guess what we do at the centre is design and deliver research that is orientated specifically to boosting women's participation in high quality, decent jobs. So it's not just any job, that's a start, but we're interested in deepening and broadening women's participation in high quality work. And in order to do that, we need policies and structures and systems that build gender equality across the career, across the life cycle and deep into the labour market. And I think that's a really big challenge that we're facing at the moment, how to drive the structures of gender equality deep within and into the labour market so it's so that they're stable. And I guess our strategy, unlike a lot of academics, many of whom are our friends and colleagues, we don't tend to stay in our offices, but we work very strongly with stakeholders that are interested in addressing these different kinds of problems, and we work with the research and with the stakeholders to develop strategies and policies to drive the structural change in the economy that is going to open up the opportunity for everybody to engage in flourishing work lives and that will deliver them economic security. So our research can be broadly summarised around 4 different kinds of pillars. We're interested in research that designs gender equality into the future of work, and so that's the tech and the robots. You know, our kind of tagline is the future of work isn't around robots and AI. It's around women. Women are the future of work in terms of the escalation in the service sector, the care economy, those kinds of things. We are also interested in tech. The second pillar is addressing these gendered segregations in the labour market in order to build sustainable careers for everybody. We're wanting to see what workplaces can do in order to align work and care better and make work and care work for everybody, for mothers, for fathers, for all parents, for employers, and for community and society more broadly. And the fourth pillar, of course, is motivating respectful, inclusive work cultures so that everybody can thrive and look forward to a vibrant and safe time at work. So, in terms of one of the questions that we're really interested in our entire research program is thinking about, well, what do women want from work? There's a lot of diagnosis of problems, but what do they actually want? And it comes out very clearly in both our quant and our qualitative data that fundamentally what Australian women and New South Wales women want is good jobs. They want good jobs, and for them, that means a job with a decent and professional living wage. They want a job that is secure, that they can plan around, that doesn't move, doesn't fall away from them, that they can organise their care around, can plan their career progression around. They want flexible work. That is a really important part of a good job for us, for New South Wales women. They want respect at work, and they want care services that allow them to participate in work at a level commensurate with their skills. So in terms of our research, what we've identified is not only what women want at work, but also there's a gap. So we identify a really clear gap between what women want at work and what they've got at work at the moment. So if we think about those features of a good job, the first one is pay. So in terms of what Australian women have now, in terms of an adequate pay that can cover their bills, 73% of women say that they have that now, but 91% of them want that, and only 73% of them have that at the moment. So there's an 18 percentage point gap between what women want and what they have now. And just a little bit of a taster, a woman working in legal as a professional worker in the legal sector talks about how she's looking for a somewhat decent culture and decent pay because I'm paid very, very poorly. Women have a very strong understanding of the value of their contribution and they want that recognised. In terms of security, again, 91% of Australian women say they need and want security at work, and only 73% of them also have that for the moment. And they're very aware of the way in which employers really challenge and the strategies and the way in which work is designed, particularly in health and human services, often really pushes back against opportunities for secure work. And now I'm going to hand over to Ray to take you through the final bits of data. Sorry.
Thank you, Liz. I always love listening to Liz talk because we emphasise different things in different ways, and I learn something every time I hear her speak. So thank you, Liz. So we often talk about, the previous one, I'm trying to move this. Yeah, the previous one was security. And I think we often talk about, when we talk about what women want from work, we actually always talk about flexibility. But I just want to really emphasise to you that women are saying they want flexibility and security at the same time. So if you have a look at security, what did you do last? Sorry.
Security. Go back one more.
Go back one more.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you have a look at security, that is a very significant group of women saying that they really want to be able to have access to work. That's statistically almost everybody want to have access to work where they can count on the work, count on the income, have a schedulable, controllable working week, essentially. So I think we have to sort of just keep that in our mind. We tend to talk about that as flex security is what women want because they want them both at the same time. And then you see quite a significant gap there of almost 20% between the aspiration and then what they actually have. Okay. Am I going the right direction, Liz?
Yeah.
All right. And flexibility, okay, we can see some very significant gaps there. So you can see that this is at about the same scale in terms of aspiration. So 88% of women say, yes, that's what I want in my future of work. And the question was to help me flourish in my future of work. That's an aspect of a job that I want. Almost 90% say, I want flexibility, yes. Not quite as high as security, which might be surprising to some people. But look at the gap. I mean, that's a very significant gap of 30 percentage points between what I aspire to and what I want. And this is really, we're picking up, Liz and I, particularly in our qualitative work, very strong conversations about people really wanting to capitalise on some of the experiences they had during the pandemic, where many Australian workers and New South Wales workers were told that they couldn't work from home at all, ever. And that there has been something of a yanking of the chain back into the workplace in recent times by many employers, and almost every day you see another major employer that's making some announcement that they want some further contraction back into the office. Liz and I have been trying to work on a principle that all of our articles from between now and forevermore, when the centre folds in about 50 years, are going to be named after a song. And the song that we're going to write about this one, about people's desire to return to work, is "We are never, ever, ever coming back to the office." So there is a very strong desire, quant and qual, to come back, to stay, and to have some control about flexibility, and to have some choice about when, where and how people work. And people learnt a lot from COVID that it's not as impossible as it sounds. Respect is the highest issue that women identify as the thing that they aspire to, which is pretty modest, really, when you think about it, isn't it? I want to be treated with respect, and we spend a lot of time digging into what that means in our focus groups. And largely it comes out for women as a very gendered experience. So they talk about, I want to be respected as a worker and a professional, but I want to be respected as a woman in terms of my contribution that I make. And often it comes down to sexism in the workplace, which happens very regularly in many women's lives across different sectors. And it also comes down to that sense of being respected as a professional. So there's still a significant gap there of 16 percentage points between the 92% aspiration and the 76% who say that they currently have that. Why is it not 100% of women saying that they currently have respect in their workplace? We did a big report recently on sexual harassment in retail that some of you might have seen, that was sponsored by ANROS, the Australian National Research Organisation for Women's Safety. And that basically showed that the title of the report says it all, which was a quote from one of our focus groups, and it was just another day in retail. And that's the way that retail workers talk about it, and many frontline service professionals talk about their work, that it's sort of almost, it's part of the environment they work in. It's like the air, that it's so much a part of their experience that they kind of expect it. And you can see that in one of the quotes there. Care. Now look at the gap, massive. 89% of people say that they would like to have, what was the question, Liz? I would like a job where I can effectively balance my work and care in the way that I need, or to meet my needs. 89% of people say, women say, yes, that's what I want, and yet only 36%, so just over a third, say, I currently have that. That's a really big challenge, isn't it? Perhaps we can come back to the gender gap there, which is probably surprisingly not what you think it's going to be. So only just over a third of women say they currently have that, so a 54 percentage point gap. That is a very big problem, especially in the context of all of these conversations we're having about flexibility and about a number of other things, and labour supply and retention. Okay, right. So how can the New South Wales government impact on that? Because that's a lot, isn't it, as my children would say, who are so young teenagers and early 20s. So we wrote this piece, sponsored by the James Martin Institute, that some of you I can see in the room came along to the launch. And this is available on the James Martin Institute's website. And in that, we sort of map out some of these big problems that Liz and I have just talked about, but we also map out in a more detailed way than I can now. And I'm looking at Peaches, who's going to tell me how many minutes I have. Oh, good. Oh, I don't. My standard mode is 2 hours, so don't encourage me. So we tried to map out, okay, so if they're the problems, if we've got those big problems that Liz talked about to start with, and then we've got what are the aspirations that women have for what they want from their working life, then what is the interrupter that the New South Wales government, and I think these principles really extend to all state governments and to the federal government, what might they do to be able to make some change? And I'm padding because I can't find notes that I took. The one that I know the most about is employment, so I'll talk about that, and I found it. So it won't surprise you, the scale of that employment that the New South Wales government has in terms of being a large employer and a large employer of women. What happens, as Liz said, in New South Wales really does matter. So there are many things that governments can do around this. As a major employer, I think there's something in there about modelling the behaviour that we expect other people to exhibit. So that means being basically a model employer, not just an employer of choice, but being the best. And that relates to, I guess, at an institutional level. So having a look at, for example, some of those segregations and segmentations. What do our feminised and our male-dominated workforces look like? How do we value them? How do we value them differently? Well, how is that built into our architecture? But it might also be looking at things at the more micro level in teams. What are the capabilities of our managers to be able to manage in appropriate ways, very inclusive, gender equitable and more equitable across other measures, teams and groups that work together effectively. And New South Wales government should be the leader in that. I know that there's a lot of work going on around, trying to drive good behaviour there, but it makes sense to me that you should be the best employer in the country around those things. Setting targets to be able to not just represent women well, and gender diverse people in senior roles, but also to set targets around other things that really matter, like men's participation in taking leaves for care, men's participation in part-time work, and really trying to monitor that and work out how we need to calibrate in order to change that if possible and if necessary. And then I think, Kathrina talked a lot about the gender impact assessment work that's going on in government. I think that applies as much to employment systems as it does to many of the policy prescriptions or program issues that are proposed. And I think that we could have a look at the way that our employment practices play out and really put a gender lens across many of them. Okay, so as a direct service provider, government also can play a major role. I think the major funder of community services in this state is the New South Wales government, and many of you probably work on programs that actually send money out into the not-for-profit sector. One thing that we do know is that many of those services that are essentially funded by the state government are run in services which are largely populated in the workforce by women. And we know that many of those people are very poorly paid. So I think there's some work to do that governments could think through. What does the provision of services mean for both indirect provision of services, but also in the way that they contract services out? What does that mean for the spread of gender equality and the quality of employment across different sectors, both in the public sector and in the private sector? I think it also goes to, if we're looking at direct service provision, looking at the ways in which we can put a gender lens across things such as social infrastructure, around health, around transport and education. And Liz and I have done a little bit of thinking about the ways in which we might, for example, think through transport and making transport systems responsive to the actual practices and lives of women, which are actually really different when you look at some really great data that you can access around things such as mobility in the day, where men and women actually, on average, travel in different ways and at different points of the day and to different places. So designing transport systems that perhaps reflect that women are much more likely, and this is why many of your women colleagues are looking harried when they get here at 9 o'clock because they run a marathon before they get here, are more likely to be doing that running between in the neighbourhood to schools, to care places, to, getting, like I often do, for realising you've actually only got mouldy bread to make the sandwiches for the kids. That sort of micro trips, trying to design that and conceptualise. That's it's an example you're all laughing at, but it's men and women travel differently in the world, and women tend to do smaller trips. How do we accommodate for that? I don't think we do in our transport system as well as we could. So thinking differently with a gender lens. As a funder for services and state infrastructure, we have to make sure that some of those critically important areas that state government directly funds in the areas such as out of school care, refuges, out of home care, where we know the workforce is over 90% female, that they are adequately funded and also adequately funded to pay professional wages to the people who work in those sectors. And that also means providing ongoing funding. That doesn't mean that anyone who's been involved in a community organisation will know that the people who run the management committees of those community organisations are not hanging out and waiting for their funding to be announced to them in the last 2 weeks of June, which often happens, and sometimes that's from state governments. As a legislator and a program administrator, obviously government holds a key legislative, regulatory and program responsibility across many different areas. I think there's been some really great progress in terms of both the work that I'm more close to the work that colleagues in Treasury have been doing to develop practice around gender impact assessments and overlaying a gender lens across proposals. But I know that's going on across agencies, across portfolios and across different programs at the moment. So I think we've made quite some headway in recent times, and I know that's been a lot of work there. And I've got to say that other state governments, when we talk regularly to public servants in other areas, often tell us that we should go and talk to the New South Wales people, particularly the New South Wales Treasury, because they're doing a very good job around some of those issues. There's also the issue of, as a procurer of goods and services, something of the scale of, I see you, I hear you. Something of the scale of the New South Wales government, both as an employer, but also in terms of just the scale of the goods and services that you procure, has a very big impact on the nature of the economy and on the nature of employment in other businesses. So I think that's about looking at putting some pressure on suppliers around women's representation in leadership, around good employment, around decent pay, and all of those things that women talk about being priorities for them in the supply chain and not just in your direct employment. Okay, so because I'm going to obey pictures, the summary I will say of where we get up to there is it's pretty simple. 3 messages. Women want good jobs. We've talked to you about the 5 elements that make up that good job package, and I'm sure we can talk about those a little bit later. We see there being 5 levers that will allow government to really drive and to deliver those good jobs and to meet the needs of women. And I think happily that will not just meet the needs of individual women, but the families that they live in, the communities that they live in. But it's also incredibly good, and we don't often start with this, but it's also coincidentally very good for economic performance, it's very good for productivity, and it's very good for business and for growth. So we should do it because it's the ultimate win-win-win across all of those areas. Thank you.
Both to Ray and Liz, that was a very data-rich, information-rich, insight-rich, solution-rich presentation, which I think laid the groundwork for discussion. So I'd like to invite Liz, Ray and Sonia up to the front so we can have a discussion. I'm keeping an eye on the time, so what I'd like to do is perhaps ask Sonia a question and then maybe one to Ray and Liz, and perhaps you could either or both, and then I just want to make sure that we can have audience questions as well. So the question I want to ask you, and I'm sure it's been on many people's minds across the sector in recent months, is as agencies roll out their flexible work policies that align with the Workplace Presence Circular, how can this be done in a way that is supportive of women?
That's a great question. I think the circular is designed to ensure that members of the public service can really participate in the workplace through all facets, and some of that is around having a flexible workplace so we can participate fully as women by being able to obtain different different parts or different elements of flexibility, such as part-time, job share, starting earlier, starting later, those types of things. But I also think there's a key element in it around feeling included in your workplace and being able to connect with people within your workplace. I'm a mother, and I'm sure a lot of women out there are parents as well. And sometimes when you go on parental leave, there's an isolation with that. And you really crave that connectivity with people, or just people of your same age, not a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old. So there is real benefits of coming back into the office and being able to contribute and collaborate with people together and being part of that community. I think there's, the workplace, the policies and the circular is all about finding that balance. And finding that balance between how can I, as a woman or a male, whoever that may be, really find that balance between what I need to do professionally and how I can contribute to the workplace with what I may need personally for my family, for myself, for my health and wellbeing. So it's about recalibrating that balance and ensuring that we can really participate and fully contribute to the workplace.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I guess the question I want to throw to Liz and Ray is, I think in more recent times we've heard some negative commentary. There was some in the lead up to the election in the US. And when it comes to gender equality, we're starting to hear things like gender equality's gone too far, and sometimes more forceful comments than that. So I guess my question is, how do we keep progressing gender equality in a context that might be divisive, possibly even hostile?
I'll say something then Ray can. I think that point that we've finished with, gender equality, it's of course I think it's the right thing to do, but I think we really need to push and develop the argument that in the current context of demographic transition, there is no alternative apart from including everybody and providing everyone with opportunities to work and care in the way that they would like to. And we don't know actually how people would like to mix work and care because our policy, our architecture is fundamentally constraining, and women have always borne the greater penalty compared to men. So if we're going to respond to, manage the demographic transition, if we're going to attend to workforce sustainability and build productivity in the context of those very macro trends that are largely out of our control, the thing that is in our control is building good jobs, building vibrant workplaces that work for everybody so that they can participate in the way that is commensurate with their skills, that allows for career progression, etc. So I think we've really got to prosecute the good for all message, because many who push back against gender equality and say it's gone too far are also the people who will respond to the economic argument. So we've got an economic argument to make, a workforce sustainability argument to make, and frankly, if we're pouring so many hundreds of millions of dollars into our education and our health sector, we want people to be able to then contribute back. So I think we've really got to refine that argument and keep prosecuting it and not get taken down the rabbit hole of the culture wars.
As usual, I agree with Liz, but I guess the only thing I would add is I think we need to differentiate between excuse me for being slightly political, but Trump and that sort of bombastic, leadership people who are just clearly, trying to split the community, and the regular people who will say these sorts of things to you, and try to actually, and one of the things we try to do in our research is to try to think about the way that some men in particular react to thoughts of gender equality. What does it mean to them? Why does it feel like it might be a threat to them? I think we've got to work with that as well. I think with the Trumps, I think we just forget about that. They're the people that you can't really change their opinions, and they're doing it for a particular reason. But there might be a bit of a, what is motivating that threat that some people are feeling. I'm particularly worried about young men and the way that they sort of react to some of these issues. I think they're being exploited actually online. But I think understanding where that narrative comes from, and then it actually comes from a bit of a feeling of precarity actually in themselves and being feeling a little bit under attack. So I'm not trying to excuse that that's definitely backlash. But yeah, I agree with Liz. There is a mutual gains, but we need to work out why it doesn't feel that way, despite the evidence. Why a lot of people don't have that same gut feeling. Yeah.
I'm just looking over at our New South Wales colleagues to see if there are any comments coming in online. But yeah, in the room, does anybody have comments or questions for our panel members? Please raise your hand.
I'm happy to kick us off. Speak loudly, just yeah. Thank you. I was just interested to know, you sort of started to dig into the male desire for greater caring responsibilities or access to caring. What are your views about the whole panel about some concrete ways that we can encourage more support in the workplace for men to be able to take up their caring responsibilities and have that flexibility?
Would like to kick us off.
I'll just give a little. So the data totally confirms what you're talking about. So young Australian men. So basically we see a convergence between young Australian men and young Australian women. So young Australian women are working more like young Australian men. Their aspirations for career, their expectations of how long they will work, all those kinds of things are really converging. So from a situation where there were very different kind of stories that they would tell about their expectations. So women are converging with men's experience of paid work, and on the other hand, young men's expectations around what a successful future at work looks like in terms of their capacity to care is converging with the way young Australian women talk about and that experience and how they expect to do that and what's important to allow them to do that. So young Australian men are wanting access to parental leave. They're wanting access to flexible work. They're wanting access to the other policy and workplace policies that are going to kind of support them to do that. So that's the expectation, that's the aspiration. So it's up to us to meet them. So if we're thinking about how to meet that need, we're on the right track. It's not a figment of our imagination that they want that, but we certainly need to deliver that. And I think one of the important things that we need to do in that space is to reduce the economic penalty of being a carer and having care expectations, aspirations, responsibilities, and doing that work. Modern Australian families can't afford to absorb an economic penalty for being a carer of a small child, of an elderly relative, of a disabled or chronically ill family member or community member. So I think it's a real challenge to become workplaces that are care-centred And one of the things we talk a lot about, and we're going to be doing some additional work on this next year, is training and resourcing managers to deliver that kind of a workplace. Because the research shows very clearly the main kind of impediment to accessing good flexible work, to accessing care policies, to using your entitlements is your manager. And so we saw this in COVID. Managers were very stressed about the sudden need to manage these kind of crazily flexible workplaces and hybrid workplaces. We can't expect them to do it without training them and resourcing them. So there's some really kind of fundamental challenges to our organisations and employers about making that possible. Policy is important, but policy won't get there as well. It won't get us there alone. So resourcing and training is really important.
I guess I would add that I think, a shifting in culture is really is enabled through storytelling. So if we can model and shout from the rooftop when men are taking up parental or parent responsibilities, and show the young men in our society that that's okay and you can actually be quite successful in doing that. And I think also there's been a shift in leadership over time in terms of women are more evident in higher roles, and there is a real it's very evident from women who are balancing those caring and non-caring responsibilities that people can see, actually, yes, I can get to that level and still be able to participate fully in my role in the organisation, but also be able to be caring at the same time. So I think we've done a better job over the last few years for some of those leaders in actually really expressing and demonstrating and really just promoting how you can do that, even being a carer. For example, at the Premier's Department, at TCO, as most of you would know, we have DepSec, who are 2 males who job share. Now, that's unheard of in lots of private organisations. They've done that for a very long time. They're fantastic at their job, and they deliver and are very productive, and they've got 2 brains, which are better than one. All of those things but it's that role modelling and people seeing that go, oh, actually, it's like, I can maybe take some time off to do that and it's not going to impact my career.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions coming in from online?
I'll just read questions and observations for Ray and Liz. The first one being, does your research look into how to shift existing gender and social norms, as well as intersectionality of women in NSW and the public sector? The other one being, it's not necessarily a question, but an observation, so if you have any comments. Women are also disadvantaged in the workforce by chronic illnesses that predominantly affect women, particularly endometriosis and autoimmune diseases, but this didn't seem to be a consideration in the study or presentation.
We're just dividing it up, talking rights. So I think, we're always quite interested in the extent to which we're now all talking about gender norms. And as someone who did a sociology major in my very proudly owner of a Bachelor of Arts degree, it's interesting because even 5 years ago, we weren't talking about norms at all in any circumstances. So I think that's interesting, and that goes to people's interest in what are the big structural and, sociological, economic forces that really govern people, and it's not just about individual choice. But I think we also can, slightly heretical view, I think we can also be a little bit powerless in the face of gender norms, because gender norms essentially are the things that we agree on as a society, right? And the ways that we behave that are seen as appropriate, and what we think are the right things for the different genders to do, or most appropriate things for them to do. And so if we start to change behaviour, therefore we're going to change gender norms, right? So that's why I think things like policy changes or nudges that really try to shift behaviour and sort of incentivise, not so much punish, but incentivise different types of behaviour are really critical here. And that's why things like the new national paid parental leave system, which is sort of nudging, and in my view not quite far enough yet, but I think that's the trajectory to say actually we need a reserved period of leave for non-birthing parents to to look after infants, and that it shouldn't just be down to the birthing parent to look after the child. And I think having a use it or lose it sort of approach sort of will start to change behaviours. And I think because of that, that will start to change what's the appropriate thing and the way that we should behave as, parents of young kids, and what gendered implications are of that. So, and all of the evidence internationally suggests that where there is more capacity for both parents sort of to be forced, I suppose, or to be facilitated, might be a better word, to take on that care work, the more likely they are to do it, and then the more likely they are to engage longer term in with kids throughout their lives. What was the second part of the question?
Okay, so I'm not going to talk about endometriosis specifically, but I will refer to another body of work, which is actually called the Body at Work Project, which looks at and starts to rethink theory and practice of the reproductive body in the workplace, right? So as we've got increasingly feminised labour markets, expectations, highly educated women coming through and trained, the need for two incomes and economic security, etc. We've decided it's really important that we reconsider this notion of the body at work, which is very scary and a real lightning rod for feminists in particular. But in that context, what we're identifying is that there is a need to consider not only women but also men as people with bodies that have reproductive capacity that needs to be attended to, and that work is a location that also has a role in maintaining health and wellbeing in that space. And by that, endometriosis is the very pointy end of that issue. There's a lot of evidence literature around women with endometriosis whose economic security is severely compromised by that experience, and that sick leave just doesn't accommodate that adequately. So that's a really pointy and extreme end. But there's issues around menstruation, around fertility, around preventative health, around menopause that many of you might be familiar with. This is a massive global debate. And I guess what you might not know is that in the Australian context, there's some really kind of leading policy that's been developing, much of it led by the unions, but also by private sector and by government. So under Premier Perrottet, New South Wales introduced world-leading pregnancy loss legislation. And that was for both the person who's experienced the pregnancy loss and their partner. That's really significant. So just thinking about our bodies and their reproductive capacity, and providing policy settings that support and acknowledge that reality. In the context of, again, demographic transition, we know treasurers around the world are very uptight about fertility. I'm not so keen on all the men lining up and being worried about that, and it's got its own politics that's emerging. But nevertheless, we know that an increasing number of couples need to seek IVF and other kinds of assisted reproductive technologies, time out from work in order to be able to accommodate that, not using your sick leave to do that. All those things are on the policy agenda at the moment. So I think in that respect, our research demonstrates that if you kind of can really hold the full range of reproductive issues together and acknowledge that there are significant risks associated to some of those policies as well as opportunities, and that the evidence base still is quite thin, and we're yet to see how different policy innovations actually impact and whether they elevate gender equality or they sideline and increase the kind of the cost to employing women. We don't know that yet, but there's a lot of interest in that space, and it is a very live policy.
I can see Kathrina wants to take that feedback, but I want to say something else. I didn't answer the most important question. Are you doing this? Yeah. The most important question that was asked then was, I didn't hear an intersectional lens. And you didn't, because we didn't present the data on that, but that's not because we don't collect it and we don't think it's important. And in fact, an intersectional lens is critical, as critical as a gender lens as far as Liz and I are concerned. And in fact, if we look at things, such as experience of racialised harassment, if we look at issues such as the age dimension to harassment, just to look at one issue, it's extreme. So people who have disadvantages or issues that are in their life, whether it's disability or chronic illnesses or a range of other things, have less choices, have more discrimination, and feel less happy in their work. And I think that's something that's very important that we need to foreground. And so whoever asked that question, that's a great question. And it certainly is something that we do foreground, and we really welcome conversations about that as well.
Thank you very much. And I'm just, I think, getting the indication that we do need to wrap up now. Or
It's three.
it's 3. Okay, so I want to thank our panel members for an excellent discussion, Terrain and Liz, for your presentation. I'm sure we could continue this conversation now, but we do have to wrap up. I do also want to thank Women New South Wales for putting together this event, and to everyone in our audience, thank you for attending. If you're not already a GGEN member, we encourage you to join. The network is not limited to women, it is open to all. To our colleagues online, thank you for joining us. We say farewell to you now. Enjoy the rest of your day. To our colleagues in the room, please join us for afternoon tea. Thanks, everyone.